Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the disability community.
Yes, thank you. So I've been working in the disability field for over 25 years, and I started working with individuals with disabilities when I was in college, actually, at UMass Amherst, and I worked with what was then called Disability Services. I'm glad now that we've changed our name to Accessibility Services, which is more accessible and inclusive to all individuals with disabilities. And then after I was a special education teacher, and I worked for several years at the high school level as a special education teacher, and then also at the elementary level when I got my master's degree in licensure in special ed. And then I decided that I wanted to expand beyond the classroom, and I really wanted to be promoting inclusion and accessibility outside of just the K through 12 setting. So I worked with AmeriCorps program promoting inclusion and accessibility nationwide. So would travel around to different AmeriCorps programs and work with program managers and disability coordinators in each state on how to best promote accessibility and inclusion within the AmeriCorps programs and be most inclusive to individuals with disabilities, and make sure that they know that national service was for them as well. And then I decided to transition into higher ed. I always wanted to work in higher education. So I moved into higher education, working at a community college for 12 years, and last few years at a private college in accessibility services. And so what I do is I provide accommodations and supports to individuals with disabilities, and just to assist them in their classes and in their living environment so that they can best feel supported and hopefully reach their highest potential.
hmm My next question is, tell me a little bit about your work in disability services. Because I know you explained that a little bit, but could you like explain in more detail?
Sure. So what we do is we provide accommodations to undergrad and graduate students, students who are on campus and online, for academic accommodations, for students for residential and dining accommodations. And students need to just provide us with documentation to support their request of their accommodation requests that they have for academic, residential, dining, whatever it may be, or all of the above. And then we just need them to include testimony and share why they are requesting that accommodation, and documentation to support that accommodation. And the most important thing for students to know when they are in higher ed is that they have to self-disclose, which is very different than high school. In K through 12, they're not self-disclosing often, and they're being identified either by a parent or a teacher as having a need and being placed on an IEP, individualized education plan, or a 504 plan. And in college, students need to self-disclose to our office and self-identify. So that's a big difference. So once they've completed that application of which accommodations they're requesting, and they provided us with supportive documentation to support those requests, then we can schedule an intake meeting. And I like to meet with students one-on-one to engage in the interactive process and determine what is the accommodations that are best going to support them. And then in some cases, because we see so many students, if their accommodation requests are just pretty straightforward, as well as the documentation, we can just approve those. If students have questions and they want to meet with us after they receive their accommodations and want to know how to best use them, we're happy to meet with them. And I meet with students one-on-one after they get their accommodations, so they can discuss how to use those accommodations, maybe of extended time on exams. That's a very common one in higher ed, is again, extended time on exams. So that would be time and a half. So if an exam's an hour, they would get an hour and a half. Another common accommodation is maybe to audio record class lecture. And so we have a software program called Glean, which allows students to audio record class lecture and then get a transcript of that recording. Students do need to qualify for this accommodation, but we have many accommodations. And again, they're individualized to the student based on their testimony and the documentation they provide, and also their program of study. And often we'll discuss with them to find out what's the best fit. but it's very case by case and very individualized. And then once those accommodations are provided, again, we'll meet with the students to share with them how to best use them. And then also monitoring the effectiveness of those accommodations. So students might come and meet with us and say, I have my accommodations, but there's some additional ones I need, or these accommodations, I want to know how to use them in collaboration with some of the resources on campus. And we'll meet with them to talk about the Writing and Tutoring Center and how to best use those resources, whether it's the library, and we have something here called academic coaching. So how to best use their accommodations, but also resources on campus so that they can really have a toolbox that will assist them as they go through their time here.
Cool. My next question is, people often face barriers in the educational realm. What barriers might they encounter when it comes to their education, particularly with a student with a disability? I can speak to this myself because I myself was in college and I didn't really know how to navigate the whole educational realm, but with academic accommodations, I was able to really succeed and look where I am today.
That's awesome. Good for you. That's fabulous. Yeah, so there are barriers in place. You're right. First of all, there's a big transition, right, from high school to college. It's a big transition for students to learn self-advocacy skills. So how to advocate for themselves and how to communicate what their needs are. And so we work with students one-on-one on developing those self-advocacy skills so they can best be able to share their needs with their faculty and with staff. And also executive functioning skills, so how to build organization and time management skills so that they're really going to be independent learners. So we work with students one-on-one on those organization, time management, self-advocacy skills. And so we want to reduce those barriers for them to be able to communicate their needs and be able to explain what they need and also understand what works best for them. And then in terms of their accommodations, yes, that's a key point in terms of having accommodations that best fit their learning needs. And again, it's going to be individual for each student. And then how to best use those accommodations with other resources on campus. So removing those barriers of understanding how to use those accommodations, how to use resources, and how to communicate their needs. And then I think other barriers students face is around accessing course content and being able to demonstrate knowledge learned sometimes with exams and quizzes. Sometimes it's only exams and quizzes, right, in a class, and that can be tough. And everyone demonstrates knowledge learned differently. Like we don't all do well with exams and quizzes of showing how we learned information. Sometimes we are better at writing a paper or doing a presentation or interviewing someone or being out in the field and being able to do a day of service and then write about that. So what I do is I work with faculty to really promote inclusive course design, which is presenting content in multiple ways so that it's not just lecture. So there's small group discussion, large group discussion, multimedia, lots of different ways the students are accessing content learned, lots of different ways that faculty are engaging students in the learning process, and also really engaging them for where they're at, what their interests and needs are, and connecting it to the real world. So when you're learning in the classroom, it makes sense, right? Maybe to what we're experiencing in the news or current events or what they're going to do in the field when they graduate or for an internship they're going to be doing. And then also, again, multiple ways to demonstrate the content that they learn. So it's not just exams and quizzes. There's papers, presentations, portfolios, multimedia presentations, lots of different ways that individuals can demonstrate that knowledge. So reducing those barriers so that there's not just one way to learn, right? There's not just one way to show how you learn that information, and there's not just one way to engage students. So when we talk about reducing barriers, it's not only for students on how do they reduce those barriers for themselves? It's really the institution, right? We need to think on an institution level. How do we reduce barriers for students to make it easier for them to be able to access the content, services, and activities on campus so that they're not fitting into our system, but we're working and fitting it for them, right? So we're really adapting for students, and they're not having to adapt to us. And that's really reducing barriers with that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with your point. Like systems and institutions haven't been adequately built in the educational realm for people with disabilities. So just kind of changing that would really make a difference.
Yes, it's very, very important to have those conversations with faculty and staff and at all levels of an institution, right? How do we really adapt to students so that they're not having to adapt to us? And so, and forever, like really assessing that, right? And that's really making sure that we're being equitable in our practices.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what can be done to make sure that a student has everything that they need to have a successful college experience?
Oh, I like that question. So there's so many important pieces to that. So one is obviously registering with our office, making sure that they have the accommodations they need in a timely manner. Students can register with our office at any time of the year, and they can use their accommodations at any time. But what I always say to students is to please register with our office before classes start so that they have their accommodations. And even though they're optional, therefore, they have them, right? And they can use them at any time. And they're already in place for them. So that way, if they decide that they need to use them at a certain time in the semester, they're there for them to use and activate. And also determining what resources are helpful to them at the college. So again, that might be the tutoring and writing center and learning how to use those resources, how many times a week they can go meet with a tutor, getting to know a tutor. I always tell students, if you find a tutor you like, get to know them, build a relationship with them so that they learn how you are learning and what your needs are, and you can really then succeed with that tutor. If there's other supports, like here we have academic coaching, so maybe meeting with a coach a few times a week on some services and supports, executive functioning skills that are helpful. The librarians at every institution I've ever worked with are amazing. So if you have a research paper, using the library and the librarians to assist you with that research. And then also working with faculty. All faculty have office hours. And so making sure that you go to the faculty's office hours each week so that you're getting to know your faculty and they're also getting to know you. And so that way, you're really able to develop a relationship with that faculty member so that if a student needs to have a question or they're having difficulty in a course, they feel more comfortable going to a faculty member that they already know and that already knows them. So even if it means going to that faculty's office hours for 5-10 minutes each week and just saying hello and building that relationship, that's important too. Getting involved in clubs and activities on campus so that really feel included and that you're part of the community is really important too. So make that social piece is so important, right? It's not just about classes, it's about the social piece too, and making those friends, sometimes lifelong friends. So really getting involved in the community and clubs and activities, and really involved in the community outside of the college as well. So sometimes they do volunteering and getting involved in that, things that are really passionate to each student. So it's a whole toolbox of strategies and resources at the college, and tapping into all of them to be successful and using them. And students who are most successful in college are those that ask for help. There is no way to get through college or life, honestly, without asking for help. Right. I even ask for help every week. We all have questions. We all need help. Right. So that never ends. So really destigmatizing asking for help. It's so important to ask for help and to start to really challenge yourself to feel comfortable asking for help. And so, and again, destigmatizing asking for help, because every student needs help and nobody graduates college without asking for help. And again, in life, it's a really helpful skill to use.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, what can institutions, educators, teachers take away from this? How can they create like memorable experiences? I know you talked a little bit about this, but just on a general sense.
Sure. So I think it's important to think about when you're designing a course, if you're a faculty member, how can I make sure that I'm reaching all learners? So it's not just individuals with disabilities. It may be someone who's a first generation. It may be someone who is just kind of maybe not as motivated, maybe just kind of getting a returning student who's highly motivated, but has not been in school for quite some time because they've been working and supporting their family, and now they're returning students. So really thinking beyond just individuals with disabilities, how do I support all individuals who are in my classroom? And that begins with engaging all learners. So when we're using something called Universal Design for Learning, that is inclusive strategies, and Universal Design for Learning has 3 principles around multiple ways of engaging learners and multiple ways of presenting content and multiple ways of assessing learners. So when faculty design courses for all individuals, and again, not just individuals with disabilities, but all individuals, and you're engaging them in multiple ways and presenting content in lots of different ways, getting student feedback, collecting their interests and needs, finding out through the semester what's working well, what isn't, and then assessing them in multiple ways so that students can really demonstrate knowledge learned in a way that works well for them so that they can be successful. That is really important for students to feel successful in the class and to feel that they can really succeed and understand the information and engage with it and remember it, and also make those connections to real world so that they can apply what they learn. And so we don't want students to just be learning information and then forgetting it, but applying it, right? Like, why is it important? Why is what I'm learning important? So for faculty to develop courses from that mindset, and then for staff as well, when we're working with students, really looking at each student individually and how to help them succeed individually. Because I always say, if you've met, one person on the spectrum, one person on the spectrum, right? Everyone is so different. And everybody, even with the same diagnosis, depicts differently. And so we really need to get to know each person individually, what works for that student. And so making sure each time as staff and faculty, every time we're interacting with a student, we're getting to know that student and what works for them, what have been their experiences, their background, what are their interests, and what has worked for them in the past, what didn't work, and what are their needs, helping them to express those needs so we can get to know them better. So we're really individualizing our support, resources, and care for that student and that student alone.
Cool. Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
Yes, it is.